What does it say about the moment we are living in when a country as methodical, cautious, and historically restrained as Germany decides that something has crossed a line and says so publicly? Because that is effectively what just happened after German authorities disclosed evidence suggesting Russian-linked actors were involved in acts of sabotage against critical German infrastructure, a revelation that immediately transformed a murky security concern into a full-blown diplomatic crisis. Not because infrastructure attacks are new in Europe, but because of who Germany is and what it takes for Berlin to point outward rather than inward when something breaks. According to German investigators, a series of suspicious incidents targeting rail lines, energy systems, and digital networks did not look accidental, nor did they look like random criminal activity, but instead fit a pattern consistent with hybrid warfare, the gray zone strategy Russia has increasingly relied on since its invasion of Ukraine, blending cyber operations, covert sabotage, deniable proxies, and psychological pressure to weaken adversaries without triggering a conventional military response. For Germany, this hits a particularly sensitive nerve because the country has spent decades building its post-war identity around stability, economic interdependence, and the belief that deep trade ties, especially with Russia, would reduce the risk of conflict rather than invite it. An assumption that collapsed in stages after Crimea in 2014 and then completely shattered in 2022 when Russian tanks rolled into Ukraine. What makes this moment different is not just the allegation itself, but the fact that German officials chose to make it public, signaling to allies and adversaries alike that Berlin now sees itself as a frontline state in a broader confrontation, not a reluctant bystander. The reaction across Europe has been quietly but unmistakably supportive, with NATO officials framing the incidents as part of a wider pattern of Russian pressure on alliance members, while countries in Eastern Europe, long warning that Moscow tests its opponents incrementally, have responded with a grim sense of vindication. The United States has taken a measured approach, backing Germany's investigation and emphasizing alliance solidarity while avoiding language that would force an immediate escalation, a balance Washington has tried to maintain throughout the Ukraine war, strengthening deterrence without closing off diplomatic off-ramps. Russia, for its part, has denied the allegations, accusing Germany of hysteria and political theater, a familiar response that preserves plausible deniability while keeping pressure on European societies already strained by energy costs, political polarization, and war fatigue. China's reaction has been notably restrained, calling for stability and dialogue, reflecting Beijing's interest in avoiding further disruption to Europe while quietly observing how far Russia can push without provoking a unified Western response. Strategically, the stakes are significant, because if infrastructure sabotage becomes normalized as a tool of statecraft, it lowers the threshold for conflict in ways that are hard to reverse, inviting retaliation in kind and increasing the risk of miscalculation, especially when attribution is contested and public trust is fragile. The best-case outcome here is that Germany's exposure of these activities strengthens deterrence, hardens defenses, and convinces Moscow that the costs of covert aggression outweigh the benefits, reinforcing alliance cohesion without triggering direct confrontation. The worst-case scenario is a slow escalation cycle, where tit-for-tat actions remain below the level of open war but steadily erode stability, pushing Europe into a permanent state of low-grade conflict that benefits no one except those who thrive on disruption. A sober reading of power politics suggests that neither side is eager for outright escalation, but that restraint depends on clarity, credibility, and the willingness of democracies to acknowledge uncomfortable realities rather than wish them away. And so the question we are left with is not just whether this alleged sabotage happened, but whether Europe, and Germany in particular, is prepared for a world where infrastructure itself has become a battlefield, and what that means for how democracies protect themselves without becoming what they fear. And if you value calm, fact-based analysis of these global shifts, please like, comment, and subscribe for more thoughtful conversations about the forces shaping our world.